something terrible happened to the man while he was hunting. He saw a brown bear suddenly charging at him from behind. He had no time to react before being knocked to the ground. Facing this 1,000-pound beast, he had no ability to fight back. He could only scream while being torn apart. But the sound only further stimulated the monster. The sharp bear claws ripped every inch of skin on his body. The intense pain left him unable to scream, and that instead made the brown bear calm down. However, this terrifying nightmare was not over. The bear stepped on his body, its paw pressed against the man's head. But no matter how much it hurt this time, he could only hold his breath and dare not make a sound. After a long torment, the bear thought the prey was already dead. It roared violently to declare its territory, then ran toward the bear cub. Nick endured the severe pain and crawled aside, struggling to pick up the hunting rifle on the ground. He knew the brown bear would not leave so quickly, which meant he was still in danger. However, the intense pain also made him weak, but he knew this was his only chance. At this moment, the brown bear wandered back over the gunshot enraged the beast again. Although the bullet hit the bear's body, it was not enough to be fatal. Instead, it made it even more furious. Nick was once again mercilessly ravaged. It frantically tore at his back, until it grabbed him and flung him several meters away. The prey once again showed no reaction. Nick held his breath and played dead, but the brown bear still refused to let him go. It violently flipped Nick over, and began confirming again whether the prey was alive. The bear panted violently and would not leave. Nick took the chance to pull out his knife. When it launched another attack at him, Nick seized the opportunity to fight back. With the sharp knife stabbing several times, the brown bear could no longer hold on. Although he successfully killed the beast, Nick would never have imagined this was only the beginning of his nightmare. No one knew how much time had passed before his teammates finally found him. When they worked together to push the bear away, they were stunned by what they saw. Nick's throat was spraying blood outward, and his back had deep claw wounds. They could hardly imagine how a person survived this. Someone believed such wounds would not last an hour. However, Nick relied on his strong will to live, and forced himself to survive the night. But the team could not stop because of him, because the local natives were the greatest threat. Early the next morning, the team set out again. Only by returning to their own camp would they be safe. Nick was carried on a stretcher. Although it greatly slowed the team's speed, his teammates admired his strong will to live. Not a single one was willing to abandon him. However, as the snow under their feet grew thicker, the team moved slower and slower. But the snowy mountain ahead, they simply could not climb. The two scouts returned to report. Due to a collapse ahead, they were forced to take a detour. The captain made a difficult decision. He ordered someone to cover Nick's eyes. If they continued carrying him, it would undoubtedly drag down the whole team, but in the end he could not do it. A kind young man and Nick's son volunteered to stay. In addition, the captain took out gold coins and left an experienced old hunter behind. If Nick truly could not make it, he hoped to give him a decent burial. However, after only one night, the old hunter impatiently began digging a grave. But 3 days passed in the blink of an eye, and Nick was still holding on. He made an excuse to send the two young men away, then came to Nick's side, saying, "If you keep holding on, you will kill your own son." The man decided to give him a dignified end, but at that moment the son returned. He raised his rifle and asked why the man was doing this, but unexpectedly the rifle was snatched away, and the old hunter pulled out a knife and stabbed the son to death. Nick witnessed everything with his own eyes, but because his throat had been torn, he could not make any sound. He could only watch as his son was dragged away. When the other boy returned, he also found the son missing, but the old hunter told him he had just seen Indians not far away. If they did not leave, they would be beheaded. After saying that, he dragged Nick into the pit. The old hunter decided to leave him here to fend for himself. The boy had no choice, so he left his canteen for Nick. A powerful will to survive combined with revenge made Nick endure the severe pain and crawl out. He knew if the Indians found him, he would surely die. The only thing he could do now was hide quickly. However, not long after crawling, he saw his son frozen solid. Meanwhile, the boy also realized something was wrong. He questioned the man why he went to the river yesterday. The boy suspected the Indians were a lie, because he fetched water at the river and saw nothing unusual.
Tell me right now and be honest, did you see him?
Put your rifle down.
Did you see the reed?
No. Not a single one.
You fucking lied to me? You lied to me!
Then the boy had his weapon snatched away. Now Nick was dead, and his son was missing. He believed the best choice now was to keep quiet. Once they returned, both could receive a generous reward. However, the old hunter would never expect. Nick's heart of revenge had already been ignited. He slowly crawled back to camp, collected usable equipment, then put on a fur coat, and crawled toward a long rotted corpse. Nick smashed the bones, then dug out the marrow. Although it smelled horribly rotten, it was the only food he could find. Nick painfully crawled to the river, but as soon as he tried to drink, water leaked out from from the wound on his neck. He choked and coughed violently. Nick grabbed a handful of dry grass from the riverbank, then poured out gunpowder, and pressed it onto the wound. Finally he picked up the burning grass, and pressed it against his throat. The intense burning made him faint instantly. When Nick woke up again it was already night. He lit a campfire in a cave by the cliff. When hungry he ate the rotting corpse to fill his stomach. To walk out of this desolate ice field, he had to use every resource. Nick originally planned to rest here for a few days, but unexpectedly he encountered a group of local tribes. If these Indians discovered him, he knew he would die miserably. He was forced to hide in the freezing river, but people were already standing above him. Seeing he was about to be discovered, he could only drift downstream with the current, but people on the shore still shot arrows. Nick hurriedly dove underwater, and luckily dodged another flying arrow. However, a greater danger awaited ahead. He was overturned by the rapid river. Fortunately, Nick grabbed a piece of driftwood, and narrowly survived the waterfall. Nick drifted downstream, finally reaching shore at a bend. He quickly took off his heavy fur coat, then lit a fire to check his wounds. Due to prolonged soaking, his entire body was infected, but Nick had no time to rest. He had to replenish energy quickly. Luckily, he had years of wilderness experience, and began devouring food. He put on the fur coat and grabbed a walking stick, but as soon as he climbed up the riverbank, he saw wolves surrounding a buffalo. He could only watch from a distance, hoping to scavenge leftovers, so it went until late at night. Nick saw the wolves fleeing in panic. It turned out an Indian drove them away, although he knew it was dangerous. Hunger forced him to risk approaching. When the Indian drew his bow, Nick raised both hands and knelt down. Nick showed he meant no harm. He only hoped for a bite to eat. Although on this land they were natural enemies, the man generously tossed him a piece of buffalo meat. Nick picked it up and devoured it. Although the bloody smell made him nauseous, to avoid making the man uncomfortable, Nick endured and finished it all. The next day, he told the man his experience. The two shared nearly identical stories. The man admired Nick's unyielding spirit, and decided to travel with him. However, as days passed, Nick's injuries grew worse. Finally, during a snowstorm he could not hold on. The man quickly gathered branches to light a fire, then set up a tent. He applied herbs to Nick's wounds. The rest depended on Nick himself. Meanwhile, the boy and the others finally returned to camp. The old hunter lied that he had given Nick a proper burial, and that his son had been taken by Indians. The captain fulfilled his promise. He felt guilty for losing this old companion. Meanwhile, Nick finally survived. The Indian had already left to search for his family, leaving behind the last buffalo leg. Nick packed up and continued on his journey, but before going far, he was stunned by what he saw. His life-saving friend had been inexplicably hanged. A group of white men nearby were clearly the killers, but Nick had no ability to avenge his friend. He could only rescue an Indian woman who was trapped, while knocking down a strong man and fleeing on horseback. Luckily, the horses were startled, so he was not caught, but his canteen was accidentally dropped there. The next day Nick was awakened by a flying arrow. A group of Indians appeared from nowhere. He drew his weapon and took one down, then hurriedly fled again on a white horse. But because the horse was shot in the leg, it carried him straight off a cliff. Fortunately, branches absorbed most of the impact, allowing Nick to survive. But after lying in the snow too long, his body was on the verge of collapse. Seeing a blizzard approaching, to survive, he cut open the white horse's belly, removed all the organs, then stripped off his clothes. Nick made himself a temporary shelter. Only this way could he endure the cold storm. The next day heaven finally favored Nick. He survived once again. Although the scenery after the snow was beautiful, he had no mood to stay another second. Nick walked across the endless snowfield. Now loneliness had become his greatest enemy. But he never forgot his mission, writing the killer's name on the wall. Meanwhile, a stranded man knocked on the camp gate. He said their caravan was attacked by Indians, and only he escaped. He hoped for a bite to eat, then took out all his belongings. The boy recognized the canteen on the table at a glance. It was the one Nick accidentally left at camp. The captain hurried out with his men to search. Finally, on a dark night they found Nick. When they saw his face clearly, everyone was shocked. A man almost torn apart by a bear had returned alive on his own. The furious captain rushed into the room with a rifle, but the old hunter had already disappeared and taken their wealth. The captain vented his anger on the boy. Luckily, Nick told the truth. He knew the boy had been kept in the dark. Now the true king had returned. How could he let the killer of his son go? Nick and the captain began the pursuit without rest, determined to capture the murderer. They followed the footprints, but at a fork they suddenly disappeared. They were forced to split up, which was exactly the old hunter's trap. Soon the captain encountered the man first. Although he knew his chances were slim, he resolutely drew his pistol. The gunshot startled Nick, but when he arrived, he only saw the captain's cold body. Nick had no choice but to take him back to camp. Meanwhile, the cunning hunter had long been waiting on the only path. He walked over cautiously with a rifle, but when he turned over the body he was stunned. Nick, who pretended to be a corpse, suddenly rose, but only hit the man's shoulder. Nick grabbed the rifle and chased after him, but the forest became his natural shield. The man accidentally rolled down the slope. Nick jumped down without hesitation, but after the fall both were exhausted. The cunning old hunter no longer wanted to run. He tried to provoke Nick with his son's death, but Nick had already seen through him. Nick charged forward with an axe, giving him no chance to speak. During the struggle Nick held absolute strength, and stabbed the knife into the man's abdomen, but he was kicked away. Nick chased again. He mounted the man, swearing to avenge his son. The man began to panic, begging Nick to spare him, saying hatred would pass down endlessly. Nick seemed to realize something. He understood revenge never truly ends, but the moment he looked up, he saw a pair of Indians approaching. Nick came up with a brilliant idea. He would leave revenge in God's hands. The man drifted down the river, and what awaited him would be even more brutal. Nick's great revenge was finally achieved, but he no longer had strength to flee. As the Indians approached, they did not attack. Only then did Nick notice the woman on horseback was the very one he had rescued, and he was saved by his own kindness.